It was a fine autumn morning in the nation's capital. At the tomb of the unknown soldier, the sentry maintained a silent vigil over our honored dead. Before nightfall that November day in 1963, a new name would be added to the nation's roll of fallen heroes. A day earlier, President John F. Kennedy had left the White House for a political trip to Texas. He would not return to Washington alive. But that morning, few Americans would guess that calamity was about to strike the country. For most, it was a time of optimism. America seemed to be on the right track. The twist was still big. At the White House, Mrs. Kennedy had given the president private lessons. The Chicago Bears were leading the Western Conference of the National Football League. The civil rights movement was underway, but it had a long way to go. In Hollywood that day, plans were underway for the film production of the musical Camelot.
Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as.
Kennedy's Camelot was brief indeed. The administration of John F. Kennedy lasted only 1,037 days. Now, 25 years later, we're still struggling to deal with the loss, the myths, and the memories of John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his time.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Many Americans can still recall vividly being moved by the words of John Kennedy. And news of his death moved them in other ways. It marked a turning point in their lives and in the direction of this country. Tonight, in this report, we'll recall 1963, JFK and that day in November.
NBC News presents JFK, that day in November.
A misty rain was falling in Fort Worth as President Kennedy emerged from his hotel that morning. Even his admirers were surprised by the size of the crowd. President Kennedy was in top form.
Mr. Kennedy is organizing yourself. Take longer. But of course, you look better than we do.
Immediately afterward, the president spoke at a fundraising breakfast. Accompanying him throughout his Texas visit were Vice President Lyndon Johnson and Texas Governor John Connally. When Mrs. Kennedy entered the auditorium, the applause was spectacular. When John Kennedy left Washington for Texas, he was on a political mission. He wanted to heal the Texas Democratic Party, badly split between conservatives and liberals. Remember, on that day in November, the 1964 presidential election was less than a year away, and it was very much on Kennedy's mind. After all, John F. Kennedy was a consummate politician.
He was the greatest politician. And you know what? He saw politics as an art. He told me that he found politics more rewarding than any other profession.
Dave Powers, a loyal family friend and now curator of the Kennedy Library in Boston.
He smiled and said, of course, if you are going to be in politics, the place to be is the White House, where you can do the most good for the most people.
John Kennedy had been taught to think big at an early age. His father, a shrewd, aggressive investor, gave his children a life of privilege. But for all of their creature comforts, the Kennedy children were drilled in the importance of a life of competition and achievement. Money was not enough. They were expected to bring honor and respect to the Kennedy name. John Kennedy was the second of 9 children, a shy, bookish sort when he graduated from Harvard. He was only 23 when he wrote a bestseller about Britain's failure to prepare for World War II. For his own part, he plunged into the war, commanding a PT boat in the Pacific, winning a medal for valor. As a returning war hero, with his father's money to bankroll him and his Irish name and charm, Kennedy was a natural for Boston politics, winning 3 terms in the House from a working-class district. When John Kennedy challenged Henry Cabot Lodge for the Senate in 1952, it was a family triumph, the beginning of the Kennedy family political dynasty. When it came to politics, the Kennedys took no prisoners, and John Kennedy became a bright new star on the national scene.
From the first day I met him, John F. Kennedy was in love with the English language. He admired great speeches.
Theodore Sorensen joined then-Senator John F. Kennedy's staff in 1953 and stayed with him to the end. He was Kennedy's alter ego. When you would work together on something, the inaugural address, the speech in Berlin, how much of it was Sorensen and how much of it was Kennedy? You've always been very modest about this.
Well, I don't think I'll change a 30-year pattern of being unable to distinguish between what was his work or his words and what were mine. They were all his speeches. He was the one who had to take responsibility for them, whether they were controversial, good, or bad.
Not many people realize that John Kennedy lived most of his life in pain from chronic back ailments. In 1954, he nearly died after surgery to alleviate the back problem. During his convalescence, he wrote another book, Profiles in Courage. That won the Pulitzer Prize.
Ladies and gentlemen of this convention,
Kennedy was determined to move up, running for the Democratic vice presidential nomination in 1956, when he was only 39, and Jackie was just 27. When he lost that, Kennedy immediately began campaigning for the top job in 1960. Again, it was a family crusade led by brother Bobby. John Kennedy was dismissed by many in the party establishment as a privileged playboy senator. But to the Democratic delegates, he was a dashing new hope for the future. And Kennedy won the nomination on the first ballot.
He and I had a standard joke that came from our Irish mothers. They used to believe the first time you visit a church, you could make 3 wishes. And the first time I mentioned it to him, we're in the Holy Family Church in Anchorage, Alaska. I knew he had never ever been there before. It's the start of the campaign. And I said, Jack, don't forget the 3 wishes. And as he genuflected and looked toward the altar, he whispered, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas. And you know, he carried all 3.
the Vice President, Mr. Kennedy, would you mind?
The fall campaign was a classic. Kennedy against Nixon. The new generation of American politics in a new era. Television.
I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
Kennedy won the debates, a turning point in his campaign, and on election night he did prevail, but just barely. It was one of the closest races in history.
You, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
Kennedy didn't have much of a political mandate, but he did have a bold new approach to the presidency.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
The new frontier was underway, and John Kennedy embodied the spirit and the energy of this new era in American life. McGeorge Bundy was director of Kennedy's National Security Council. Professor Bundy, why do you think, as a historian, that John F. Kennedy looms so large in the consciousness of America 25 years after his death?
Mostly what my generation remembers and what others seem also to feel is the extraordinary human quality of the man. One of the most attractive human beings that happened in our generation.
However people felt about Kennedy's politics, they recognized that in the popular culture, he was more than president.